How's everyone doing? Welcome back to another episode of The Banker Next Door. I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. Today we're going to talk about boardroom performance. How are your board of directors performing? Are they doing a great job? Are they not doing a so great job? I saw basically a blog post and a great article that came from Bank Director, which we're going to take a look at here. So here is the article from Bank Director. Basically says addressing poor performance in the boardroom. So boards may be tempted to consider term limits or mandatory retirement ages, but there are better ways of dealing with an ineffective director. So I thought it was great timing on this, and I want to read everybody just a blog post from Emily McCormick, who's a vice president and editor of research for Bank Director. So you can't have a high-performing company without a high-performing board. That starts with the chairman, says Alan Kaplan, CEO and founder of Kaplan Partners, in his September Bank Director article. Bank chairs play an important role by presiding over board meetings and fostering productive dialogue among board members. And who holds that spot can be controversial, with proxy advisors and shareholder activists often advocating for separating the CEO and the chairman positions. Dividing the two roles can be a mark of an independent board, but that's not the full story. Boards could also consider how long the chair has held that position and whether that person is effective at the job. Tenure can be a double-edged sword. According to the 2024 U.S. Spencer Stewart Board Index, the consulting firm's annual analysis of S&P 500 boards, including financial firms, the average tenure of an independent chair has increased over the past decade from 4 years in 2014 to 5.5 years in 2024. Experience can prove valuable in the boardroom, but complacency can impede oversight. And look, let's just say this: there is no substitute for experience. You need some people with some gray hair sitting in the boardroom, have been around for a while, have been through some cycles, hopefully are some good business people, and hopefully know something about banking. But those are the individuals that you definitely need in your boardroom. So let's continue on here. So just like a board seat should not be a Supreme Court appointment, why would a committee chair or board chair seat be a lifetime appointment? Kaplan says, at a minimum, I think there should be a re-election, a reaffirmation of a board chair every 3 years. He says the practice, which would include a formal evaluation, can also help curb outside influence from a long-tenured, powerful chair who holds too much sway over the board and executive team. That reaffirmation could result in greater accountability for the chair and more churn in that key position. Some boards make it a practice to rotate committee chairs. Why not the board chair? Different leaders run boards differently, Kaplan says. Relationships change, CEOs change. It's a tough job with a higher level of responsibility, though, so finding the right skills among current directors could prove difficult. But who serves as chair shouldn't be based on time served. Kaplan says some boards default to the longest tenured board member, even if that individual isn't the best qualified for the role. You don't want to institutionalize any role. That's not a best practice in governance. Kaplan says refreshing the chair can be beneficial and avoids feeling like the chairman is calling the shots. So, great blog post right there. I thought there was a lot of really key things in there. So the basically what they're saying is the average tenure of the independent board chair has gone from basically 4 years to 5.3 years. So it's gotten a little longer. There's obviously a lot of controversy around the two roles. The CEO, your chairman of the board. Should that person be the same person? Should the CEO also be the chairman? I think it depends. I really do. I really do think it depends. I understand the argument for separating the two, but I also understand the realities of life, and I also understand the realities of board dynamics. You get 8, 9, 10 people, 12 people maybe in a room, and trying to get consensus out of that group can be very difficult. And sometimes you need somebody in there who's just going to have the final say, and they're going to listen to arguments from all sides. They're going to say, okay, here's what we should do. And then somebody has got to make the decision at the end of the day. It's again, and it's not a dictatorship. Again, it's not, you do have, again, you're looking for consensus, so you're trying to get, make sure you get as many people on board as you possibly can. But that doesn't mean that most of your decisions are going to be unanimous. And sometimes if you got 9 people on the board and maybe 4 people want this and 4 people want that, you got to have somebody's got to be the deciding vote and somebody's got to make that decision at the end of the day. But like I said, I really think it depends on the individual that's in there. Are they performing? Are they a great CEO? Maybe they've been on the board for a long time. Like, in other words, as part of succession planning, I think what you find more times than not is it's somebody who's been with an organization for a long time. They've probably moved up the ranks. Maybe they went like, CFO to chief operating officer to president, and then finally CEO. And maybe when they were chief operating officer, or maybe when they were president, they got put on the board because everybody knew that, within 5 or 10 years, this person was eventually going to become the CEO. So they got put on the board, and they weren't chairman. They're just another board member on the board, but they did that to, build the relationship with the other board members in anticipation of the succession planning, which was ultimately going to take place one day. They did it. So they did it to build relationships. They build it so that individual could begin to see what goes on at the board level, what goes on in the board meetings, get comfortable with the process year in and year out. What are all the different things that the board has to do all the time at all these different meetings? So a lot of different things might be happening there. And then one day that person goes from, then they go president, and then they become CEO. And then maybe you have another chairman at the time. And then that chairman eventually retires, steps down, and then that CEO then becomes the CEO and the chairman. That to me is normally how these things play out. It's not. I think it's unusual that someone just gets hired and just comes right in, and boom, they're the chairman and CEO of the bank. Can it happen? Has it happened? It has, sure, but I don't think that's the normal kind of process. I would say that there's a small percentage of times when that happens. I think it's more of a dynamic that gets built over time, and as part of a succession planning at the bank, and how things unfold. And I think you really have to look at, like, how is that person performing? Like, are they performing really good? Are they making the right moves? Have they built the relationships with the rest of the board? Are they keeping the board happy? I mean, obviously, if somebody's just running around doing things willy-nilly, kind of, acting power crazy, acting like a dictator, just running around, like, that person's probably not going to last very long in that job, because the other board members are probably going to get very unhappy. And at some point you might have a mutiny of some kind, where they might say, all right, you gotta hit the road, Jack. But anyway, let's take a look at this article here now. So this is, again, addressing poor performance in the boardroom. So, and this article basically, like I said, I thought these were good bookends, because it basically says in here, it's like, so it's the board's responsibility to handle poor performance by individual directors, but too often it's a task relegated to blunt tools like age limits. Sometimes it can even be swept under the rug. People want to avoid a difficult conversation, so the thinking goes, if we set a term limit, then we don't have to have a difficult conversation when somebody isn't engaged, says Julie Bell, head of leadership advisory with the executive search firm Chartwell Partners. A poor fit in the board can encompass a range of behaviors, from a director who's not meeting a minimum standard for performance to one who's actively combative toward other directors and management, says James McAlpin Jr., a partner at the law firm Bryan Cave Leighton Praisner and member of Bank Directors Board. A bad fit doesn't get better with time. And in my opinion, if you have a significantly problematic board member, it's the responsibility of the board to just deal with it. He says age limits and term limits are a bit of a cop-out. And I kind of agree on that. I mean, I think that I think that age limits and term limits, they can work. I mean, I'm probably a bigger fan of the term limit thing. Just basically just have, everybody gets 3 years, and you have to renew them every 3 years. And that way, if somebody's a problem, basically the board can just say, as in unison, they could say, hey, we're not sorry, love you, but we're not gonna renew you at the 3 years here. You got to go, and we're gonna elect a new board member. I think that's probably the best way. And, it's tough. It's tough. Most of the people that sit on bank boards are successful business people. A lot of them, they have their own business. They've come into the bank. They've invested personally in the bank. They've bought X amount of shares in the bank. Maybe they've had a relationship with the bank for a long time, and, somebody passed away, or somebody, leaves their board seat, and now they go and say, hey, we need another board of director. Hey, this person's been a long time shareholder, great, successful business person in the area. They can drive a lot of business to the bank. Let's bring them in, so then that person comes in. Um, so it's an intro. All I'm saying is that it's not a black and white issue. There's a lot of dynamics here, and it can get complicated very quickly. So, this goes on to say, mandatory retirement ages are particularly popular in the banking industry. 4 years ago, in Bank Director's 2020 Governance Best Practice Survey, 43% reported using a firm mandatory retirement age as a way to create new seats in the boardroom. 15% had a mandatory retirement age with exceptions, and just 5% used tenure or term limits. So that's interesting. So you got 43% they're using that mandatory retirement age. 15% had a mandatory retirement age, but with exceptions. And then just 5% used tenure or term limits. So that's kind of interesting that only 5% are using the term limit things. That's kind of interesting to me. So term limits and age limits on a board can be a divisive topic with good reason. An infusion of fresh ideas and new voices can benefit the board, but the wisdom gleaned from years of experience can also be a valuable asset, especially in a highly regulated field like banking. While many bank boards perceive longevity as being highly valuable, oftentimes longevity comes at the expense of having directors on the board who are more current and active in the business community, have skills that are more relevant for where the bank is today, and also at the expense of simply bringing fresh voices into the boardroom, says Alan Kaplan, our friend Alan Kaplan from the blog here post here, founder and CEO of the executive search and board advisory firm Kaplan Partners. While Kaplan favors term limits and age limits in some circumstances, he also describes them as artificial mechanisms for fostering board refreshment. But there are tools that can help boards be proactive with director composition and engagement. Regular board evaluations and peer assessments can drive conversations around director performance, but many boards are missing out on that opportunity. According to Bank Director's 2024 Governance Best Practice Surveys, which I covered in another episode just a week or so ago, conducted in May and June, 41% of directors reported that their board does not conduct performance assessments, which can be used to evaluate governance practices and the effectiveness of the overall board. Just 26% conduct annual or less frequent peer-to-peer evaluations, which examine the performance of individual directors. Bank Director offers both as part of its bank services program. So some banks make individual directors' renominations contingent upon a positive performance evaluation. Performance assessments may also reveal areas where the board needs more training. And then it just goes on to say, the role of the board is to be a strategic advisor to management. And if the board isn't comprised of a varied group of highly skilled people who can add value strategically and risk-wise, clearly contributions over time simply become more limited, says Kaplan. A board seat is a rare, precious thing. And then it closes out by saying, establishing expectations from the get-go about board service entails may save boards a lot of headache in the long run. Banking is an industry of relationships, and it's no different on the board. It's hard to tell someone you've become fond of or close to that their services are no longer needed, she says. It's easier when expectations are set up front. So, I think it's a very interesting thing. I think that there's kind of a double-edged sword here, because in today's world, with just the way that technology is progressing, you have certain things like cybersecurity. You have regulation. You have all the BSA, AML. You have just so many different things going on. You see banks getting nailed for a lot of things. You see the whole Synapse failure with the questioning the whole BAAS model, working with fintech partners, how that is all playing out. You're seeing TD Bank with all the issues that they're having right now with the AML and the BSA stuff. So there's a lot of things going on there that, banks work with a lot of technology providers to help, run a lot of these departments and run a lot of these services. And so, you need people on your board that at least have a basic understanding of how all that stuff works. I mean, and then, again, they don't have to be experts in it, but they got to know, they have to understand basic things, and they have to be knowledgeable enough about it to basically ask your executive management team smart questions, right? They got to be able to ask good questions because again, they are, like it said in the article there, the board is there to be a strategic advisor, so they really the board needs to constantly do their homework about what's going on in the bank. But you need people that are, kind of up to date with a lot of this stuff. You can't, if you got somebody who's been sitting on your board for 40 years, they're probably not as with it technology wise as some probably younger people would be today. That being said, like I said, there is no substitute for experience. You need some people with gray hair on your bank board that have been around for a long time, that have been through business cycles, that have probably been on the board for 20 years or been around for a while, have seen the changes in banking, have seen, again, there are certain patterns to things that happen in banking. Yes, there are different things. When you go back to when you study a lot of the recessions and crises and different things that have happened, I mean, everything is a little bit different. You go back to the 70s, you go back to the failure of like Continental Bank, and then First Pensy Bank that had to be bailed out. Then you go into like the savings and loan crisis in the late 80s, early 90s. You go back to the dot-com bubble bursting. You go back to the great recession in 07, 08, 09. You go back to the pandemic. I mean, all these things had kind of slightly different flavors to it, but at the end of the day, it's all the same stuff. You got your credit quality. You have loans that go bad. There's nothing that sinks a bank faster than bad loans. So you credit quality, interest rate risk, operational risk, all these different types of risk that banks have to be aware of all the time. So you have to have people around that just understand these things, that have that knowledge, so like when somebody who's relatively new to the board comes in and thinks they have a great idea and they're like, oh yeah, let's do this. And let's do that. Let's, I hate to say it, let's automate the loans and let's do this and blah, 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 because we need to come out of this, well, somebody who's been around a while might sit there and say, well, hold on. That's not really what the bank does. That's not really the bank's strategy. That's not really the type of customer that we target. That's not who we go after. Maybe we tried something like this 10 years ago and it didn't work out so great. Maybe the technology wasn't there yet. Maybe they figured out that wasn't the best move as part of the built into the bank's overall strategy, that kind of thing. So again, you need both flavors. You need some people with some experience that have been around for a while, and you need some younger people that are kind of really understand the technology, really understand the regulation, really understand the different big kind of hot button issues that are going on right now, so that together all that stuff can provide the right performance. And then I'll finally say this: when you do have a board member who is perhaps not performing up to stuff. Maybe they're late to meetings all the time. Maybe they're not reading the board packets. Maybe they're not really contributing to stuff. And then maybe when some of the other board members, kind of try to gently, hey man, maybe you should try to be on time like the rest of us. And then they start getting snippy with everybody, like usually at that point, again, it's going to fall to the chairman of the board. That individual, if they're both the CEO and the chairman, they're going to have to then have that conversation. They're going to have to then step in with that and sit down with that board director, basically say, hey, you're not performing up to snuff. You gotta step up. Otherwise, we might have to have an evaluation, or we might have to do something here that's a little different. So, but the only reason I say that is because it's difficult. It's difficult. All this stuff is difficult. It's not easy. Like I said, we're all human beings at the end of the day, and it's the relationships. These are all relationships, and you have to be able to, build those relationships at the board level and build consensus. And that's it. So, but again, I thought this was a great blog post. I thought it was a great article, just kind of pointing out some of the different things going on in bank boards today, term limits, basically, some of the things, do people age out? Do we have age limits? Do we have term limits? Do we have, performance evaluations, like all these different tools that can be used to help in kind of managing your board and helping you if you do have somebody who's not performing up to snuff. So there you have it. But anyway, So I'll wrap up with, if you like this episode, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that always helps the channel. Remember, we are on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. Please leave your comments down below, as I love getting back to everybody. And make sure to check out some of the other content on the channel. Do not forget that the BND Strategy Room live stream is every Friday night at 7 p.m. And I hope to see everybody there. And I will talk to you again real soon. Thanks.